Hello there, I'm Haslinda Amin. Digitalization has been a game changer for SMEs in this time of COVID-19. Some say it's a difference between those that will survive and those that won't. But unfortunately, even among SMEs that have embraced technology, the level of digital adoption has been uneven at best, and that is a big problem. As OECD's Angel Gurria says, there'll be no sustainable digital transformation without SMEs. Let's get insights, perspective from our distinguished speakers today. Audrey Tang is Digital Minister of Chinese Taipei. Simon Milner is Vice President, Public Policy Asia Pacific for Facebook. Paul Stocks, Deputy Chief Executive for Labour, Science and Enterprise, New Zealand Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Minister Tang, let's start with you. You've been described as one of the 10 greats of Chinese Taipei when it comes to computing personalities. In your view, how has open internet helped society proactively tackle the COVID-19 pandemic?
The computer personality thing, that was in 1996. I wasn't aware that it's still making the rounds. But anyway, I think we benefit from the open internet in the strategy that we call open response and open recovery, the detail of which is in digitalministry.tw. But in short, I think the open internet allowed a participatory accountability system on mask rationing, on making sure that collective intelligence surfaces the whistleblowing from Dr. Li Wenliang from Wuhan starting last December, not this January, where we can get the SARS 1.0, which is the 2003 collective traumatic memory standard operation procedures rolled on in January, even before we have the first local transmission cases. And from that onward, I think another key thing with the open internet is thanks to the social media, we share those very pro-social messages, such as wear a mask to protect yourself from your own and washed hands, which connects hand sanitation and the mask use. And also, when we roll out physical distancing, we say when you're indoor, keep 3 Shiba Inus away, and when you're outdoor, keep 2 of those Shiba Inus away. And all of these ideas we're spreading have a much more joyful, higher transmission value, if you would, than the conspiracy theories. So everybody remains calm and connected, even in the time of pandemic.
Paul, I want to turn to New Zealand. A large number of SMEs, especially the traditional ones, have been lagging behind. How have SMEs in New Zealand shifted their strategies amid the pandemic? Has the pandemic really expedited digital transformation? Because some reports have suggested, for instance, here in Singapore, more than 50% of SMEs say the pandemic has in fact delayed their digitalization plans. Priority has been about staying afloat.
Kia ora, thanks. Look, 2020 was not the year any of us thought was going to happen or would want to do again, but it has created a real shift in how we've had to operate. So 97% of our firms are less than 20 people. They are SMEs. And in March, we went into a 2-month, essentially a full lockdown of our country, where all non-essential activities stopped. Only supermarkets were able to trade. So it was a real sea change in how we worked. And what we saw, just as we're doing now, is that people had to find new ways of doing things. We're all now experts in Teams and Zoom and working remotely. Similarly, our small businesses did the same thing. So we saw really quickly new business models forming up, even in local community delivery of meats and vegetables, etc. And they did that using digital technologies and B2C, direct B2C communication and sales. We hadn't really done that before in New Zealand. We are a small country, 5 million, and you can just walk down to the corner shop. You couldn't do that in the lockdown. Businesses had to change. It's had really good, I think, stimulus for how businesses are now thinking about the future. Again, small country, a long way away from anywhere. We've always talked about the tyranny of distance. Well, digital economies take away that tyranny and actually turn it into potentially an advantage. So I think it's had a real sea change for our firms. It's not an easy transformation to take, particularly when you're struggling in a global pandemic, though.
Have you been surprised by the pace of change?
Yes, I have. We've done a lot of work in the last decade providing the core infrastructure that you need for digital economies. So we have UFB fiber gigabit to pretty much all homes and businesses these days. And what we saw was that infrastructure was there, ready and waiting, and people actually moved on it very, very quickly because there wasn't really much choice.
And Simon, Facebook plays an important role in supporting people, supporting communities, small businesses to connect to others. What have you observed in terms of how COVID-19 has impacted people generally and how it's impacted the digital strategy of small businesses?
Well, hi, everybody. It's great to be with Audrey and Paul on this panel and to be connected and talking about these important issues. I'm so pleased that APEC has provided this platform for us to talk about the important role that SMEs and digitalization together have helped us to survive 2020 and in some cases thrive. But also as we look forward to 2021 and beyond, this is going to be incredibly important. Now, we've seen a whole range of things on our services and of course on other people's services, not just a Facebook story. It's incredible to see just the rise of a platform like Zoom, which was really a business platform before all this and now is used by hundreds of millions of people around the world to connect for business, for government, for pleasure. So that's a wonderful thing to see. But one thing I just want to pick up on from what Paul and Audrey were talking about is these things don't happen automatically. Companies can't just say, oh, let's go digital. They do rely on deep infrastructure investments, typically by large infrastructure companies and sometimes by governments that have helped us to enable a good digital infrastructure. They rely on devices and good competitive markets that deliver those. And most importantly of all, I would say, is they rely on the seamless transfer of data, or for Paul's benefit, data. That's incredibly important. So one of the things that, as I lead the policy team for Facebook in Asia, and as well as working with our colleagues who support small businesses around the region, and there are hundreds of millions of them that are using Facebook's products. Part of my role is to figure out with governments what's the best kind of policy environment to enable this digital infrastructure, this digitalization to be promoted, to be enabled, to really drive the kind of economic. To be honest, economic survival, let's put it that way, for 2020, but hopefully economic recovery, and that we'll see that this period of transition has been a real catalyst. And actually, we see some really big benefits for economies and therefore people around the APEC region.
And Minister Tang, we talk about this pivot to digital. We heard from Paul how he's been surprised by the pace. Are you confident that SMEs are now more resilient, in a better position to cope with the next crisis? Having a digital strategy in place is one thing. Having a successful digital strategy is another.
That's a great question. In fact, I think the digitalization, the campaign promises of Dr. Tsai Ing-wen 4 years ago, namely broadband as a human right, has really paid dividends in Taiwan in this particular COVID situation, because all the SMEs, all the pharmacies, all the convenience stores, and so on, have a very good connection quality to the rest of the society, and everywhere in Taiwan it's equal access. We designed so that even on the top of Taiwan, almost 4,000 meters high, you're still guaranteed to have 10 megabits per second for video live streaming both ways for just 16 euros a month, unlimited data. Otherwise, it's my fault. And so this basic promise made sure that even when we're during the pandemic, for example, people can see all the nearby pharmacies and so on. This is contributed by citizen technologists, is the mask rationing map, so that people who queue in line even can check with their phone of the mask availability of that particular pharmacy and see that people queuing before them swipe their national health card and get maybe 9 medical masks per 2 weeks during the ration, and then they can check whether this system is function as intended. And if it doesn't work, or if it breaks in some places, they would just call the hotline 1922 and be connected to a call center that will then, through the idea of open government, amplify their suggestions to the rest of the society the very next day. So we have this daily live stream by the Quint, by the 5 medical officers. So, for example, back in April, when a young boy called saying, "Oh, you're rationing our mask. Oh, I get this pink medical mask. I don't want to wear it to school." The very next day, the Quints, the 5 medical officers, all wore pink medical masks. And because of this become a kind of fashion statement. You see the online SMEs and so on all adapted their branding and color their branding pink. And so suddenly the boy become the most hit boy in the class because only he has the color that the heroes wear, and even the heroes because the medical officer, the Minister Chen Shizhong, said actually Pink Panther was his childhood hero, and so it became a kind of fashion statement during our Pride Parade and things like that. And all this helps the SMEs to thrive because they can reach through this kind of new normal fashion branding and so on, and reach to a very wide audience and get assured that all of them have pretty good broadband access regardless.
And Paul, among SMEs that have embraced digitalization, there are also challenges. They seem to be less likely to protect the data. They're not well placed to counter cybersecurity threats. At least that's the view out there. What interventions can policymakers adopt, you think? How big a problem has that become?
So I think there's a couple of things. The research we've done in New Zealand says that the challenges for SMEs around digital and data are twofold, actually. Firstly, skills, access to the right skills and training. It's not actually infrastructure. We've pretty much got that in place. And then there are issues of security. And so governments have a broad role. We play roles around supporting infrastructure, at least in New Zealand. You do play roles in terms of supporting with things like skills and training. And actually in any market, there are regulatory standards and settings. And a really important thing for any market, whether it's a physical market, a services market, or a digital market, is the ability for consumers to have trust. To trust that when they hand over their credit card, and by the way, New Zealand's gone pretty much entirely cashless now. Almost all transactions, even in person, are electronic, which has been one of those rapid accelerations that we saw as a result of COVID. But when people hand over their credit card or their information, their data, that they can have trust and confidence about how it's going to be used, and it's only going to be used for the purposes for which it was intended. And we've actually had, thinking about the international context, we've got pretty well established rules around the world for trading in goods, for trading in services, for the movement of people. I think the next frontier is thinking about what are the rules that give consumers and citizens confidence about the digital domain and about how they interact in that. And that's a core role for both individual governments and collectives of governments to work upon.
And what's your take on that, Simon? I mean, in terms of protecting data, cybersecurity threats for SMEs?
Well, I think Paul got it completely spot on. It's about skills and trust, I would say, probably rather than security, Paul, which I think combines a range of different things, including security. On the skills front, as a company, we recognized we had a responsibility on this front many years ago. We started an initiative called She Means Business here in the APEC region. And now we've trained over 1 million female women entrepreneurs on how to use Facebook's tools to grow their business. And there are some incredible stories of women entrepreneurs that have done that. And of course, we support male entrepreneurs as well, and anyone who really wants to grow their business. And every one of the 97% of firms that Paul referred to, there's a person there. There's a person this is their baby, this is their passion, and we want to support them with the skills they need in order to exploit the digital environment. But I completely agree around the trust issues as well, and this is absolutely something where we know governments have to lead. Quite rightly, people elect or look to their governments to set a framework which enables them to feel confident as they're using so many different digital services, both homegrown and global ones like Facebook operates. And we think regulation is very important. And that, guys, we believe that it's right. I mean, New Zealand's got a new privacy law which comes into effect soon. There are many other countries that are looking at Do we need to upgrade our laws around this issue? We're supportive of doing that. We think having an international kind of approach is also very important, because we worry about countries saying, well, maybe the easiest thing to do is just to kind of, a bit like COVID, let's lock everything down. Let's go to level 4. Let's just keep all our data inside the country. And that's the way we're going to keep everything secure. That's absolutely the wrong way. If we do that, we will all fail. Data isolation is a dead end for the APEC region, and indeed for the world. And we are genuinely concerned, though, that there are some trading blocs in the EU, notably, that do think this may be the right approach. This is, I think, an opportunity for APEC to lead, for the economies of this region to show, actually, we think the right path is a different one. It may be harder to say, actually, we're going to be open for data transfers, but we're going to do it within a regulated setting. But it's clearly the right approach for SMEs, for people, for our economies and our societies, to go down that kind of more open approach. And I'm really pleased that in Minister Tang and in Paul, we have 2 policymakers who are, I think, very aligned with that perspective, although it's hard, that's the way we need to approach these tricky issues.
Minister Tang, government to lead the way? And what role can the private sector play?
Yeah, we worked with Facebook before the pandemic on another demic, the infodemic issue, because our presidential election was in January. So like the pandemic followed immediately after the presidential election. And what we have found in both the infodemic, which we countered with no takedown, and the pandemic, which we countered with no lockdown, is that if we make sure that the social sector, as the mask map example shows, do the data collection and most of the data processing, and also set the data norms, so that it's like a distributed ledger, more than 140 different copies, including voice assistants and chatbots and so on, are available to track the mask's whereabouts. And then it will create a very strong social norm. And the state will then work with, for example, with Facebook on just ensuring those norms are observed in a truly multi-stakeholder fashion. On the other hand, if the state sees it as our role to set the norms, or if the Facebook sees this as their role to set the norms, then the society feels that the data are being collected in the name of counter-infodemic or counter-pandemic. And that never goes anywhere, right? People will, of course, very reasonably want to know the privacy as well as cybersecurity guarantees of those new data collection methods. So I think I do agree with the principle of this free flow of data, but I think add to that is the idea that those data are being collected and produced by people. And this has precedent as well, because in a liberal democracy as we are, we don't say that journalists and their editors are just text collectors, text workers, and text makers and text processors, right? There is a journalistic norm. And we say in Taiwan, starting last year, instead of media literacy in our basic education curriculum, we say media competence, acknowledging fully that all the primary schoolers, maybe some of them have more Instagram followers than I do. And so because of that, are media workers themselves and need to be educated in the way of how a journalist approach text. And so if these ethics and norms around text could be transferred to the data realm, then we do have a thriving social sector that could then communicate the norm around data collection. And I think our COVID success is largely due to making sure that people understand where the data is going, how the data is processed, and can co-create in the data processing abilities, so that we do not need to collect any new data that we were not collecting before the pandemic in order for the counter-COVID work to happen. And so I think that is also one angle, a addition perhaps to Simon's main argument.
Paul, we talk about the rise of the digital economy, how we need to ensure it's open, it's non-discriminatory. What's key to policy to ensure all of that?
So I think that some of the things we've already talked about, that issue of trust, and at the end of the day, citizen and consumer protection is really important. But we've had established basically rules-based trading systems over a century. So we've got pretty good at those, albeit, occasionally they have their flaws. I think one of the challenges is how do they emerge quite rapidly. So the digital economy is emerging extraordinarily rapidly. So how do we keep pace with that? So one of the things that New Zealand has done with Singapore, with Chile, is the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. And what that's trying to do is say, how will these three countries, and it's an open agreement, so anyone can join, not that that's an advertisement, but anyone can join, is how will we agree the rules of the game for things like data transfer, around the rules for electronic invoicing, electronic payment, stuff that at the heart of it could seem kind of boring, but those grease the wheels of commerce. Knowing how people can get transactions paid. We've got in the New Zealand context, we're putting a lot around making sure that there is easy and open access to electronic forms of payment across the economy, and importantly with government. If we don't do it, we can't expect others to do it. So I think those are the kind of initiatives that will help seed kind of a momentum for how the world as a whole will go. It won't start with a big bang. It'll be a series of initiatives, I think, that promote kind of open commerce and trade whilst protecting citizens.
Right, Minister Tang, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just add to that? No, it's interesting. I just wanted to pick up one of the things that Paul said, which was it can sound boring. And as somebody who's come from the UK to work in this region, one of the interesting things about, for instance, the Brexit debate is people didn't really talk about trade very much. For most consumers, it feels like a rather kind of boring topic, actually. But people have now begun to realise that actually it's one of the most significant consequences of Brexit is the impact it will have on trade for the UK. And I think there's a similar thing here, that whereas people can understand kind of privacy and their privacy of their data, actually engaging the public, engaging the public in issues around how the technology that they rely on every day, from their devices to their favorite apps, to their particular kind of supermarket they like to do their online shopping from, how that actually all works, and the importance of data underpinning that is one of the great challenges, I think, both for companies like ourselves and for governments and indeed for civil society as well. And hard for broadcasters, right? Data transfer stories are not the most interesting stories to do that are really going to capture an audience's attention. So I think we've all got a collective challenge. One of the ways we are trying to do this is we have a program called We Think Digital, which is a program designed to take people on a journey around understanding the digital landscape. And how services like Facebook and others work. So it's not just about Facebook. And we've now rolled that out in many different economies around the region. We've certainly found that people have found that as a very useful way just to get a feel for these issues. So I think that's another, so this is not just about regulation. It's also about education and enabling people to understand how these things work. And of course, it's also about jobs. I mean, there are tremendous, this is a huge growth area for economies right across this region, and engaging not just young people, but frankly, people who might think, well, I want to change a career, come and join this fast growing sector. So I think there's tremendous need, but also opportunity that comes from digital literacy education as we go on this journey together. Absolutely rightly, Minister Tang, in terms of a multi-stakeholder approach, completely essential.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, I think it's incumbent on all of us to help people do that. So the days of a 36-page end-user license agreement and asking people to click accept, I just don't think really work for people. They can't have trust and confidence about what they're really being asked to sign up to. So as you say, it's not just about regulation, it's about all the actors in the system acting in a way that people can, as you say, the average person can actually engage with and understand and know what they're agreeing to.
Yeah.
And Minister Tang, talk to us about the values of radical transparency, digital openness, and how that can shape new forms of decision making.
Yeah, certainly. So radical transparency, meaning transparency at the root. For example, all the meetings that I chair, including interviews with journalists and lobbyists, are recorded and published into the commons as either a transcript or as a video online. And so this makes sure that people understand not only the what of policies, but the how of policymaking and the why of policymaking. Why are we even considering these policies in the first place? And this also engages the collective intelligence in ways that we have not seen before, because everybody can just call me and and say that, Minister, you're wrong about this in your previous meeting, and I have a better idea. And so this also fosters social innovation. For example, when we're designing the triple stimulus voucher, the TSV, which is this simple idea to reduce the friction that people want to, start re-engaging in the post-COVID situation, because we reached the kind of critical mass on the physical vaccine around June, and people restarted their visit to night markets and those catering businesses and so on. So we want to encourage people to spend more on face-to-face gatherings. And because of that, we designed it so that if you spend using the credit card, but only in a kind of outdoor shopping setting, $100, then you can redeem actually 2/3 of that back on a nearby friendly automated teller machine, and which is in cash, so you're likely to spend it again. And this has been quite successful. Actually, the revenue of retail and catering this August and September has reached the highest since the 1999, actually. And so our production capacity also recovered. The export orders have grown 13% than last August. But this is because all the convenience store, all the supermarkets and non-markets and so on, just called me and say, we want to join on this too, and just make the triple stimulus vouchers quadruple or quintuple, or like many times more, by offering their own discounts and by offering their own ways to, for example, you can choose to dedicate that 2/3 to a non-for-profit organization of your choice. So instead of drawing from the ATM, you can type in the donation code for a charity, and then the stimulus vouchers reward goes to that charity, and that is from a social innovation lab visitor to my office, because my office is literally a park. Anyone can walk in and say, hey, Minister, I have seen the transcript of your previous meeting, but I have a different idea, and I would really like the triple stimulus voucher to continue this way to work with social entrepreneurs and so on. So this is literally my office, and anybody can just walk here and have like 40 minutes of my time.
Wow. Simon, when we talk about shaping the future, there's the issue of digital fragmentation, issues to do with the flow of resources, talent driving the digital revolution, innovation. All that poses a threat to businesses. What coordinated action can be taken to counter fragmentation of rules surrounding digital trade, you think?
Well, I think this is one where it's like most of the big things that get achieved. I mean, actually, look, there's some fantastic innovations there that Minister Tang just shared, but most of the big things that happen around this space take a large group of people working really hard for an extended period of time. Now, let's just be clear about that. So this is not about quick fixes. It's about getting into the detail, pulling together, using opportunities like APEC to come together and to work these hard issues through. And so I'm confident that with policymakers like Minister Tang and Paul and many others, and the commitment of companies like Facebook, and we're not the only ones, there are many other companies that are keen to get involved in this, lots of different charities and groups that are interested in digital education. I think we've got the groundswell of people who are there to do this, and we just need to keep working at it. And there'll be bumps on the road, and there'll be occasions when people, for understandable reasons, say, I'm not sure we're getting this quite right, and we've got to keep learning from one another. So this dialogue that we have both at national and I would say more importantly at international level is going to be absolutely crucial. But I'm optimistic. I think the world is going to emerge stronger from 2020. Yes, it's been a really horrible year, and a year that many of us, I don't think we'd want to forget it, but we just want to make sure that the world learns lessons from it, both from a public health perspective, and one of the benefits this region has had is you went through SARS and Europe didn't. So Europe didn't learn the lesson from SARS, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's not coped as well with the pandemic. But let's learn the lessons of the digital kind of pivoting that's happened, particularly among the SME community, but also among our people and our societies. Let's learn those lessons. Let's build on those successes. And I really think we will look back on this period as an incredibly important turning point in this digitalization story, and for positive reasons. But it's not going to happen by accident, and just because I've said it, we're going to have to work at it. and Facebook's very much committed to doing that.
Paul, your take on countering the fragmentation of rules surrounding digital trade?
Well, I think Simon's made some really good points. It won't happen overnight. These are processes that take some time. I think APEC and APEC are really important forums to have these discussions, as is the OECD, as are other places, as we work out about how the world post 2020, and really we're just kind of, in some ways, we're just at the beginning of the 21st century. 2020 is such a milestone year, and it's changed everything. And nothing, I don't think, will ever be exactly the same again, even when we've moved past the pandemic. I think it's changed the way that societies have seen themselves. And in the New Zealand context, it's been amazing to see how our community has come together and, basically joined together to combat both the disease and to work collectively as a society. We had this phrase in New Zealand that Prime Ministers, famously used of, be kind. And that's a really nice thing to focus on when you're all facing the same challenge. Be kind. Now that may not necessarily translate well into an international trade context, although wouldn't it be nice if that was the phrase of the day? But I think finding ways for it to work for everyone, for different countries together, for the channels of commerce, and e-commerce is just another form of commerce, and for the people for whom they're actually intended to benefit in the first place, and that'll take some time.
In addition to that, Paul, how will New Zealand be thinking about digitalization, connectivity, and SMEs as it hosts APEC 2021? How will you frame that?
Well, this will be the first virtual APEC. I mean, it's a big challenge for us, and we're really missing the fact that we won't be able to welcome the world in APEC down to New Zealand. We were really looking forward to hosting everyone. So we're going to have to do it differently. And we will do it in the way that we're sitting around the table now. We're talking to each other virtually using digital communication means. We'll be supporting our firms to make the most out of that, to learn lessons. One of the things, again, we've done some surveys, and the most common way that firms learn how to digitize and take advantage of the opportunities is not from government training programs. It's not from formal education. It's actually from learning from their peers. I think 51% learn business to business. So the more that we can facilitate that business to business transactions, both domestically and really importantly internationally, the more you're going to spread the ideas of innovation, how to do things differently, how to take advantage of these new mediums that have just really burst onto the scene as a result of the challenges we've faced with 2020. And that's what we'll be focusing on APEC. How do we really use 2020 as a platform to launch into a real version of the 21st century?
Simon, this one's for you. Where do you see the biggest opportunities as we talk about a digital future? There's so much optimism out there that we can make the best of this crisis.
Yes, lots. One of them certainly is people learning from each other. I think the example that Paul has shared, and indeed that Minister Tang has shared, are actually really about community and how we continue to build and develop community. Sometimes at national level, it seems, but also at very local level. But there's also a community of entrepreneurs. And as Paul put it, communities learn from one another. And that's certainly the model that we take into all of our work. So when we do our She Means Business events, and now they're virtual, one of the most the things that people, they want to hear from the experts in Facebook and how to market their particular products or services, but they also want to learn from other entrepreneurs. And there's nothing as inspiring as someone who is like you, who went through the challenges you went through and can tell their story. And I've been to a number of She Means Business events around the world, and those are always the bits which are the most engaging. So let's ensure that we continue to make sure that our products, which are about enabling people to build community, do just that. And they were also open in the way that Minister Tang explained, this radical transparency. It's incredibly important to us that we hear from people who are using our products about how they can get better. And they always can get better, just as the support that governments provide to communities of entrepreneurs or other communities, you can always improve. And the story of digitalization is iterative improvement. Yes, there's some big bangs, but a lot of it is just constantly tweaking and thinking, how can we do this better? How can this particular widget be improved? in a way that's going to help someone. And so, for example, we're launching a product called Shops on Facebook, which is just a very easy way. So rather than somebody having to kind of build a separate e-commerce platform to enable e-commerce through Facebook. It's early days. We've got a lot of catching up to do. There are many other bigger players on this than us in the technology space, but it's one of the things that people have said to us. I want this to be easier. So I think that kind of virtuous circle of working with the community of entrepreneurs around the APEC region, working with kind of forward-looking, open-minded policymakers in economies across the region. That's the way forward here. So I remain extremely optimistic. I think this is going to be one of the great things that we take out of 2020 as a world, and certainly there's no doubt about it, APEC is leading. We're at the tip of the spear in a positive way in leading for the world, and the world is watching how the economies of this region emerge, how economies in this region have fared during this crisis, and how well many of the economies have done. And so there's a tremendous opportunity for APEC to lead, and Facebook wants to be part of that.
And Minister Tang, you're definitely someone who can inspire that community of entrepreneurs that Simon talked about. In your view, what are you most excited about in leading as the digital minister?
Yeah, in our national digitalization plan, digitization is just the first pillar. It talks about the infrastructure, broadband as human rights, 5G that goes first to the rural, indigenous, and remote islands. But that's just the first pillar. The other three pillars in the DIGI program are innovation, governance, and inclusion. And I see there's a kind of linear progression. We make the infrastructure of digitization work because we want to foster innovations. And the innovations, in turn, foster this cross-sectoral partnership around the governance and data normals. And finally, that is to include the people, including women's entrepreneurs, SMEs, and so on, social entrepreneurs. We call the social entrepreneurs who originally may be charities or co-ops and so on, but through the training programs and the peer-to-peer learning, they enhance their resilience and become like very visible. And we do actually prefer the buying power program if a large enterprise or large organization integrate those social entrepreneurs' products and services into their supply chain, then I personally go out and give them an award. Or the presidential hackathon, which encourages this kind of cross-sectoral collaboration. And every year, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen goes out and gives 5 winning teams the trophy. The trophy is a shape of that island, and then if you turn on the microprojector underneath, it shows Dr. Tsai Ing-wen handing you the trophy, promising whatever you did the last 3 months, it could be about improving water use efficiency, it could be about remote telecare and so on, that will become public policy in the next 12 months with all the regulation, personnel, as well as budget required. And this is a very strong incentive for the social innovator then to figure out a way to work with existing ecosystem players in a way that is kind of like a moonshot from an individual social entrepreneur's point of view. But because of this power of the presidential hackathon, then it gets translated like fast track warp speed into public policy within 12 months. I think the executive power as a hackathon award, that really excites me.
All right. On that really upbeat note, Minister Audrey Tang, Simon Milner, and Paul Stock, thank you so much for your insights and perspectives today. Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.